hosting a webinar on pronouns. Yeah, I broke it.
In the Dominican Republic. So gender is an absolutely fascinating topic, sex and gender, and just like humans are fascinating in general. All right, what I have on the screen is that our mind space for this, I'm encouraging that our mind space should be one of focusing on manners, on curiosity, on thoughtfulness and consideration. Now, I'm not necessarily trying to tell you that I will teach you manners, because that in and of itself would be bad manners. You're all grown-ups, and I'm sure that you know probably better than me how to behave in public. But what I mean is that all of this has a lot to do with just the topic of manners, which is essentially the topic of being kind to another human and acknowledging the importance of another human. And it has a lot to do with curiosity, because I'm assuming that the majority of you are cisgender, which means not transgender. And therefore, I'm assuming that chances are a lot of these things are a little bit of a new concept. And so it requires a little curiosity to learn these things. Thoughtfulness and consideration, they're basically the same word. One is the Latin root and the other one is the Saxon root. But I find that all of this requires thoughtfulness in its most essential meaning of the word, which means that it's a thinker. You got to think about it. Some of these things don't come naturally. So that's something else I encourage you to do. I encourage you to lean into the mental work that it takes to find new concepts and so forth. One very natural reaction when it comes to the LGBT community is there are all these terms, right? There's agender and gray gender and gender fluid, and it might seem overwhelming, and it also might seem a little bit of a chore. So I want you to consider something. We have all learned a few terms over our lifetimes, and especially over the last 10 years, that weren't part of our vocabulary before. I wish I could have made them appear one at a time, but if you look at these terms, I now know the term rickrolling, which was not part of my vocab maybe 10 years ago. The term twerking was not something that I grew up with.
Recording in progress.
GPS was not part of my vocabulary many years ago. Who in here knows what a Whovian is? Write it in the chat if you know what a Whovian is. Somebody in the room must know. Nobody knows what a Whovian is in here?
Whovian?
Okay, well, it's not like I'm boasting because I found out as I was doing this exercise. But just like a Trekkie is somebody that follows Star Trek, a Whovian is somebody that follows Doctor Who. And this is a new part of my vocabulary now. If any of you has teenagers, you've probably heard no cap. No cap is very, very new. My daughter says it. Does anybody know what no cap means? Kate, do you have any idea what no cap means? It means I'm not lying to you. It means that this is for real. When I read it, it said no cap. It's an expression that means I'm not lying to you, usually said by somebody who's lying to you. Porch pirates is a new thing. You know, as Amazon drops off all these packages now, there's a little bit of a scandal with people taking your packages. Porch pirates was not an expression as early as recently as 2 years ago. So we've learned all of these words, and we continue to learn new words. So if we are able to learn the word bromance, or upcycling, or these words, then I'm sure that we can learn some new vocabulary in terms of gender inclusion or social justice. Some other places where you find new vocabularies is like if you're learning a particular topic that's new to you, and I just randomly picked aviation, you're going to learn some vocabulary that you don't use in everyday elsewhere. For example, aileron. Aileron is kind of a weird word, and obviously it didn't exist before airplanes were a thing. If you didn't have the word aileron, you could still describe it. And the closest I could come up with was wing rudder, which is sort of kind of the thing. When my daughter was very little, she described the restaurant as the dinner store. So you can describe things somewhat awkwardly, but you can describe them not using the right vocabulary. But it's best to use the right words. And all of you have learned a whole plethora of real estate lingo that's unique to that field. In my case, I use Photoshop every day. So things like levels, curves, gamma, saturation, the difference between a PNG and a JPEG, these are everyday things for me, but I would probably have to explain to them to somebody who doesn't deal with these. So each topic requires its own lingo and its own nomenclature. It's not that the LGBT people are trying to make things difficult for you by coming up with new words. And you learn these words depending how invested you are in the topic, right? I've learned the word aileron. Chances are that's the only word that I'm ever going to know about aviation because it's not my topic. It depends on how emotionally invested you are in the topic of LGBT rights. You might learn more. I mean, throughout this session, you're going to learn some more words. But you will continue your education in each one of these words at your own leisure. But the main thing that I want you to challenge is this very common gut reaction of like, oh my God, all of these terms. Again, if you're a realtor, you probably know the difference between a bungalow, a mid-century ranch, or a Foursquare. I don't. Something that I found really interesting. So granularity in terminology is really helpful to describe the specific, to describe, like in your case, to describe the difference between one house and another. It also helps with something else. It helps people be seen and it helps people relate to one another. I'm from South America. I was born and raised in South America. And it happens to me pretty regularly that somebody else also from Latin America, which includes South America and also Central America, will hear my accent and will say like, oh, where are you from? Some days I'm in for it. And some days I just really don't want to do the whole thing. It becomes boring. I know what they're going to do. They're going to say that they're from Costa Rica or they're going to say they're from Mexico. We honestly don't have any dishes in common or geography in common. They don't know much about my culture. I don't know much about theirs. It's a big world. So we're going to be like, I don't know, bantering for a second, but the subject is going to dry out. Fine, we're both from Latin America, and it kind of dies out there. The reason why I bring this up is because one time I was in Florida doing a seminar, and this man said to me, where are you from? And I said, South America. And he said, where from in South America? And I was like, oh, here we go. We're going to do the whole merry-go-round. And I said, Argentina. And he said, where from in Argentina? And I said, Buenos Aires. And he said, where from in Buenos Aires? I'm like, wow, okay. So I said, I'm from the North Zone, Zona Norte. He goes, where from in Zona Norte? And by then I'm like, you gotta be pulling my leg. So I said, Olivos. And so now he leans forward, smiles, and says, where from in Olivos? Turns out that he grew up 3 blocks from where I grew up. And he was only 2 years older than me. So chances are we ran into each other on our bicycles when we were children. So granularity sometimes really bonds you together because you have that specific thing in common with somebody else. And that's why in the LGBT community, sometimes it really helps to say, well, you know, I'm a demisexual, agender, gray sexual. And for somebody else to go, oh my gosh, me too. But for somebody that might not relate, you could just say, I'm queer. And that's probably like, that gives you a general idea, just in the same way that I would just kind of dismissively say, I'm from South America. So you don't need to know the granularity unless you're looking for that bond or unless you're looking for the specificity. But the whole idea of pronouns, the whole idea of having terminology and different forms of address is not entirely a new one. So, for example, there was a specific shift in our culture when the word Ms. was introduced. Ms. pronounced with a Z, which is spelled MS. Pivoting away from Miss. I read up on this and I was amazed to find out that Mrs. did not stand for a married woman. In 1901, 1910, Mrs. stood for a woman that has servants. So a master, so you wouldn't naturally be Mr. John Smith. You would just be John Smith, unless you had servants, unless you were a lord, or unless you had a manor, in which case you would become Mr. John Smith. And if you were a woman, then you would be Mrs., Mistress, or Mrs. Mary Smith. But it didn't mean that you were married, which led to a lot of confusion in literature. But Miss meant a child or a young maiden. And if you were called Miss later than, say, 20 years old, it actually probably meant that you were calling you a prostitute. So it created a really an uncomfortable point for unmarried women. And also the whole idea of having to define yourself by which man you belong to is something that eventually women got tired of. So we came up with Ms. Another big shift in our culture was we went from being referred to as Mrs. John Smith, because we were married to John, to being called, in my case, Mrs. Cassie Bryder. In other words, we would get to own our first name. So that was a shift too. Other shifts that you see happening in society is my daughter, at some point when she was 11 or 12, I asked her if she wanted a play date with her friend, and she was outraged because they're not play dates anymore, Mom. They're hangouts. And it essentially describes the very same activity, but there was a milestone, there was a progression there that I needed to acknowledge with my words. So not play date, but hangout. And if I said play date, she would feel disrespected. Along the same line, we have words like doctor, officer, captain, which indicate some kind of a milestone in a person's life, some kind of achievement. We put PhD at the end of somebody's name, or we call them doctor, to indicate that they've progressed in some way throughout their lives. Also, here's another one that I thought of. You wouldn't call your mom, like I wouldn't refer to my mom by her last name. It would be odd. So she expects me to call her mom, and your mother probably expects you to call her mother or mom. So it's perfectly accurate to call her Mrs. last name, but it would be odd. So all of this matters because what we're doing is we are respecting the context in the interaction between those two people, in the interaction of ourselves with that person. We're acknowledging the milestones that they've gone through in their lives. We're acknowledging the growth that they've had in their life and the changes that they've had in their life. We're basically saying, I see you. That's why it matters. Oop. Oh, I swore to myself that I wouldn't do that, but I did it. I kind of spoiled it. Okay, talking about doctors and captains and stuff like that. And this probably won't work by now, but let's see if somebody can tell me, and unmute yourself to answer this question, but like on an airplane cabin, where does the captain put the cap? The captain's cap. If you would like to answer this question, unmute yourself and speak it out. Who's willing to jump in? It's not graded.
On the captain's head.
Okay. Okay, but if the captain removes it and places it somewhere during the flight.
The coat hook.
Okay, well, this was an experiment. I was looking to see.
Places it on people upside down.
Yeah, that's probably right. Could you say that again? I didn't quite hear you.
I said he places it on the table upside down.
That's probably true, yes. And Pat, you just kind of confirmed the point that I'm trying to make. So I'm going to ask you something about surgeons now, something about doctors. Who gets to pick the cap, the color of the cap, the design of the cap that the surgeon wears?
I would assume the surgeon.
Okay, so this time it didn't work, but
I would
it
say the hospital.
it is the surgeon. But I was looking, what I was looking for is pronouns. And it,
Oh, yes.
it kind of worked in one bit because Pat, you fell for it. And it's not like I'm trying to.
It's okay.
But we naturally think of airline pilots and surgeons as male. So we think his, we think him,
Mhm.
very naturally. So what I'm aiming at is, it's amazing to what extent we have a structured society where some people are at the top and at the center, and other people just sit kind of at the sidelines or at the periphery. It's changing. We're making progress. There's a picture of the first all-female crew and in an airline, and then there's a picture of an all-female surgery. What's it called? A theater. So I found these pictures really cool. But naturally, we tend to gravitate to he pronouns because that's what we've been conditioned to think. So the question is, who owns the room? And who gets to live in the room? Who gets to participate in the room? But also, who owns it? So I recently watched a TED Talk delivered by a Native American person, a Native American teacher. And he was talking about the US Constitution. The US Constitution starts with these really lofty words that says, we the people. And we hear this a lot. When we hear we the people, we think it's all inclusive. But there's 51 times that pronouns are used in the US Constitution. And it's always he, him, his. Because they're only talking, when they say people, they're only talking about men. And they're only talking about landowning men. They're also talking about white men. Because in that same constitution, a black person is described as 3/5 of a person. And in that same constitution, a Native American is described as a bloody savage. And women are not even mentioned. So who got to own that room at the time? And of course, our culture is changing, but it's interesting to know that that's what we came from. I'm going to play a video now. Let me know if you can hear this. This is a snippet from a speech by Anne Hathaway. Hopefully you all can hear it.
No, for real. What I love about this community is the freedom that comes with being yourself, all of yourself. I love the energy, the activism, the generosity, the light, the shade. The fun. I love the dignity that accompanies self-acceptance and the way our collective humanity gets expanded when one wrongfully marginalized community says, we are human beings, there is enough room here for all of us, period. This declaration that one's worth is not affected by one's sexual orientation or gender is a trailblazing concept that lifts humanity into its fullest expression of itself. This is the declaration that precipitates deep, lasting change. This change, once embraced, will make us free. I hope. I really hope, you guys, but the path to freedom, to equality, is currently being blocked by a big, heavy, almost invisible lie. The lie is not about whether we are equal. The lie is about whether our opportunities are. It's important to acknowledge that whatever my actions have been, however hard I have worked, however the world may have marginalized me and my experiences, that my standing here, my ability to be visible to you, comes from the world unfairly rewarding my particular type of visibility. It is important to acknowledge that, with the exception of being a cisgender male, everything about how I was born has put me at the current center of a damaging and widely accepted myth. That myth is that gayness orbits around straightness, transgender orbits around cisgender, and that all races orbit around whiteness. This myth is wrong, but this myth is too real for too many. It is ancient, so it is trusted. It is a habit, so it's assumed to be the way things are. It's inherited, so it's thought immutable. Its consequences are dangerous because it prioritizes a certain type of love, a certain kind of body, a certain kind of skin color, and does not value in the same way anything it deems to be other to itself. It is a myth that is with us from birth, and it is a myth that keeps money and power in the hands of the few instead of being invested in the lives of the free. I appreciate this community so much because it's where I learned to reject this myth. I appreciate this community because together, we are not just going to question this myth, we are going to destroy it.
Now, it's not that we're trying to bash on white, rich, cisgender men, but we're just trying to create a different paradigm than this paradigm. In this paradigm, a rich, old, white, cisgender, straight man is valued more than a white, cisgender woman, is valued much more than a white trans woman, and it's valued galaxies more than a black trans woman. Somebody saying, what does shade mean? Everyone laughed. Giving shade to somebody is when you put somebody down, it's slang. So for example, in our current culture, here's the next slide. It's going to be a picture of a group of politicians talking about women's rights. And you might notice that there's something odd in here. So who owns this room? Who gets to be in this room? Who gets to decide things in this room? So this is just uneven. So I like this room better because this is a room where I see more representation. I see more different types of people. Now, I might say I don't necessarily see myself in that room because I'm a trans woman, so I don't immediately catch myself there. I'm kind of looking at the white-haired woman who's laughing, and I'm thinking, chances are that's going to be me in 10 years. But this is a more equitable room. I don't feel that one person or one type of person owns this room. Talking about who owns the room, I don't know if you know what the ADA is. It's the American Disabilities Act. And it's what got us the bars that we put in bathrooms so that people in wheelchairs can hang on to something when they use the toilet. Can anybody put in the chat when you think that we all as a nation decided, hey, this is a good idea, disabled people should be able to use public restrooms as much as anybody else? Would you say that it's 1920? Would you say that it's 1930? Can anybody venture a guess? Somebody said 1960. I think that was Erica. Does anybody else want to guess? 1970? Keep on going, keep on going. 1974? You're getting warmer. It was in 1990. There we go. Christine, did you Google it? 1990. That's within our lifetimes that somebody said, hey, you know what? Disabled people should be able to use the restroom. So that's pretty wild, in my opinion. Here's something else that I read. Capitol Hill has a whole bunch of people in the House of Representatives. The men can access the bathroom just by walking 2 minutes to an adjacent room. What year do you think that women got an adjacent bathroom to the chamber at the House of Representatives? Was it before or after 1990, you think, that women got this? Almost. It was 2011. And this one blows me away, because when I read this headline, I thought, well, surely this must be from the old past. When did California pass a law saying that it's okay for Black girls to wear their natural hair to school? That they wouldn't be sent home because of wearing their natural hair home. 2020, this was last year. So we're making strides as a culture, but so ever so slowly. And all I'm doing with this is I'm talking about who owns the room. Here's a typical classroom. Who does this classroom leave out? Who are we being inconsiderate to in this classroom? Lefties, that's right. This room is completely non-functional for left-handed people. One of the reasons why I did the exercise with everybody, all of you putting, if you're left-handed or right-handed, and putting your, what's that? Oh, and putting the color of your eyes, is because that's an unusual question. It's not something that you would normally do, but you can answer the question. You can decide to follow along for the sake of humoring me, which I really appreciate. Or you could have also said, nah, I don't want to do it. That seems complicated. That's an imposition. As far as I can see, all of you decided to play along, which I really appreciate. There's another reason why I wanted to do it. Being transgender is penalized in this society. Being transgender is considered by some to be a freak, to be going against the rules of God, to be going against nature. If you go 150 years ago, that was the prevailing thought about left-handed people. Being left-handed 150 years ago was viewed as a sin against God, and it was viewed to be against nature. Luckily, we're making progress. All of this comes to define 2 points I think are important for today's session. What is privilege and what is entitlement? You might hear this word thrown around. It's not a bad thing. It's not an insult. What we're saying is this. If you looked at that picture of the school and the desks didn't seem unusual to you, or you didn't stop to think about the desks, it's because as a right-handed person, in this particular vector, you're privileged. And because of that, in this particular arena, you're entitled. Because you look at this and you say, well, yeah, of course, that's the way it should be. That's a perfectly functional classroom. And if you're left-handed, you look at this and you see a problem. You see something that you need to resolve. So a lot of the mental exercise that I'm asking you to do is at any point, ask yourself, am I on the privileged side of this equation, or am I on the marginalized side of this equation? If you find yourself in a misogynist environment where you're not getting access to something because you're a woman, then chances are you're in the marginalized side of the equation. And if you're a man and you don't get what the big fuss is all about because it's something you've never experienced, then chances are you're on the privileged side of the equation. I was talking to an acquaintance of mine who works as an Amazon driver, delivering packages all day. You know what Amazon has given no thought to? when it comes to Amazon drivers. Period. A woman delivering packages has different needs than a man delivering packages. They've made zero account for this. So depending on where you are on any given side of the equation, you might find yourself on one side or the other. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that chances are you didn't have to think about this, which takes us back to the point that I was making at the beginning about being thoughtful. Being thoughtful is giving some thought to things that you normally wouldn't think about. So the questions become, how do you signal to somebody you are welcome here? How do you signal to somebody you're safe here? And how do you say, I consider you my equal. I don't consider myself at the center with you somewhere orbiting around me. I once had a conversation with a man who, when I just very casually kind of told him, because of the way I think, because of the fact that I teach this, I told him, well, take you, for example, you're a cisgender, heterosexual, straight man, white man. He said, why do I have to have all those labels? I'm just a person. And I'm like, no, listen, buddy, I have to wear labels. You get to wear labels. You're not just a person. You're a type of person. How do you signal to somebody, this room is as much yours as it is mine? So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to do a little breakout exercise. And Kate, would you be able to administer the breakouts? I think I could do it. What I want to do is I want to send you off into groups of, I'm guessing 5. We don't have breakouts, do we?
Yeah, we do. And I just set them up and we'll get everybody in. Yep, 5 rooms. So we'll have 4 to 5 people in
Excellent.
each room.
We'll do this really quick, but what I would like you to do is to try to think of an example of something where you are on the marginalized side of things. And then think of an example where you are on top, where you're in the privileged side of things. And just see if you can come up with an example and share it. And then we'll meet up here again in about 4 minutes. So now I'm going to rely on Kate to do the magic.
For those of you remaining, you should have an invitation to join a breakout room. Please feel free to jump in that. Katie, if you have the space, I'm going to jump into a breakout room.
Sounds good.
let's close out the breakout rooms. Who's got the power to close out the breakout rooms?
I just did that and they'll be back in about 50 seconds.
Excellent, that works. So yeah, the example that I just shared in my room is that I worked in this house that had a couple of steps on the way in, and I never thought about it at all. I just walked into the house and walked out. And then over a year after I started working there, somebody pointed out that putting a ramp in for handicapped people might be a good idea. And I never noticed it. It never occurred to me because on that particular side of things, I'm on the privileged side. So this exercise is just meant as a gratefulness exercise, I suppose, and to get us to see that in order to be thoughtful, which is where I started from, you need to actually give some thought. You need to give some thought to the things that you normally wouldn't think of because you don't have to think about them. Does anybody want to share something that, some takeaway from this exercise?
What was the question?
If you had any kind of takeaway from this exercise, if you had anything that made you think and you'd like to share something.
I had a situation, this is Erlene. I just a few days ago, I had to show my clients a place out in Cornelius. It was like they were looking for a place with acreage, and there were two gay guys, and one guy I have sold to him over years, 3 or 4 things, and we just know each other really well. And so then when I drove up, there was this lady coming out and she says, well, you're early. And I said, okay, we can wait. And about that time, my 2 guys drove up. And so she don't know we're leaving. And so I said, are you the owner? And she said, yes, she and her husband. And so we went in. The house was really pretty, and you could smell where they had really just cleaned it, you know, and stuff. And so we went through the house, and I was with them all the way through the house. And then we looked at the outside, but it wasn't, the land wasn't quite what they needed it for. So the realtor called, she texted me, and she said, I was wondering, I'd like some feedback. I said, oh, sure, I meant to do that day. And I was telling her it was really beautiful, but it just didn't fit them. And then she sent me this long rambling message about it's our responsibility to leave the house like we found it, and went on and on. I'm like, what the hell is she talking about? And so I went back and I said, we left, you know, I followed them around and we left the house exactly like we saw it. I said, was somebody else scheduled after us? And she said, no. And I thought that was so strange. The only thing, they had a little dog, and he picked up the dog and carried the dog with him, but nobody touched anything. Nobody took anything out of place. So then I was telling him, and I said, I don't know. I said, maybe when she saw my black plates, and he says, yeah, 2 gay guys, maybe they thought we were, I don't know. I said, but you know what? I told her, I said, I've been doing this for 28 years. I sit on the ethics board for PMAR. I don't know what you're talking about, but we left that place exactly like we found it. We loved the way it looked, but it just was not the right property. So you might tell your sellers, and I don't know what to say. Yeah, so I felt some kind of way about that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, the fact that when we are marginalized, we feel the marginalization. We just don't know exactly like what's behind it.
Yeah.
I'm in kind of an ironic situation in the fact that by now, I am read enough as a woman, because I've been transitioning for 6 years, that a lot of people make the assumption that I'm a cis woman. So I don't quite know when somebody is marginalizing me, if they're being transphobic or just misogynistic.
I don't know.
It's one of those.
I don't know what it was, but my guys got, the more he thought about it, the more upset they got. And I go, you guys stop it. It's okay.
Yeah, but there was definitely something there. Okay, I'm going to start moving a little faster because I'm running out of time. But so one thing that I hear a lot is like the LGBTQIA community, and it's too many letters. And when are they going to stop with the letters? The important thing about that is that it used to be the gay community. And then at some point, people were like, should we probably acknowledge lesbian too? And so they started saying the gay and lesbian community. And then bisexual people said, you know, what are we, cauliflower? And so the LGBT, and then of course, transgender people said, we happen to exist also. And more different demographics raised their hands and said, we also happen to be real. Intersex people, asexual people happen to be real. By the way, something nice and heartwarming about this is that it used to be the GLBT community. And during the AIDS crisis, lesbians showed up and cared for gay men in such a way, and they were such heroes, that it was universally accepted that they're going to change it to LGBT in honor of lesbians. And I thought that was really sweet. I didn't know that history. But anyway, there's different ways to describe this. I heard the term quilt bag, which I find hilarious. Quilt bag is queer and questioning, unsure, intersex, lesbian, transgender, and two-spirit. It hasn't caught on much. There's also gender and sexual minorities. I just like to use the word queer. Some people don't like that word because it's a reclaimed slur, but it's a lot shorter and quicker than to say LGBT. I'm going to define a couple more terms.
Do you want to share your PowerPoint again?
Oh, yeah, I think that would probably be better, right? Because I'm referring to it. Okay, here we go. So you probably have heard the term cisgender. Cisgender just means that your gender is in alignment with your biological sex. Cis means right next to you. For example, cis-alpine means right next to the Alps. Cis-Atlantic means on this side of the Atlantic. Transatlantic, transalpine, transgender means on the other side. That's all it means. But the reason why we say cisgender is because if we didn't have that word, what would we use to describe a woman who is not transgender? We would say normal. We would say biological. We would say regular woman. All of that implies that trans people are irregular, abnormal, unnatural. So that doesn't work. So scientists came up with the word cisgender, which is a really good word, and that's all it means. Transgender obviously means that your gender and your biology happen to be misaligned. The word AGAB or AB stands for the assigned gender at birth. So if you're a girl and when you were born, somebody said, hey, congratulations, it's a girl, then your assigned gender at birth is female and is in alignment with your gender now. So you have assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth, AFAB and AMAB. People also use MTF for male to female transgender and FTM for female to male transgender. I really don't like those terms because that's referring to a medical procedure, not to a person. But the main thing that I want to tell you is that you have your identity, which is in your head, it's in your brain. You have your attraction, which is the person that you like. I guess they're putting it in your heart, like the people that you fall in love with. Then you have your sex, which is in your chromosomes and in your crotch. And your expression is how you like to dress, whether you paint your nails or not, and stuff like that. All of these things are different. And in a cisgender straight person, they all happen to coincide. And in a trans person, they're not aligned. I'm going to move a little faster. I'm going to skip these things, sorry, because we have to hurry up. So this is actually a good representation of sex and a good representation of gender. Yes, there are two genders. Yes, there are two sexes, but there are two bell curves. Like you take somebody like, I don't know, the average man, they are somewhere in the middle of the right pile. But you take somebody like Conan the Barbarian, and he's an outlier. He's way on the far right of that. He's hyper masculine. And you take somebody like Kim Kardashian, and she's on the very far end. of the feminine gap, but that's not where most people are. Most people are somewhere in the middle, or over the middle of the bell. And then there are people who are in the middle of the middle, and those people don't quite fit boy and don't quite fit girl, which is the whole deal with non-binary. A non-binary person is somebody that doesn't fully identify with men, doesn't fully identify with woman, which brings us to pronouns. So now I would like all of us to actually do what several of you felt compelled to do at the very beginning, which made a lot more sense than writing brown or writing red or writing left or right, which is let's write our pronouns. So in my case, I'm going to rewrite this as Cassie, she, her. And what I'm doing with that is I'm indicating that my name is Cassie. And when you talk about me to other people, the polite thing to do is to use she and her, because I'm a girl. Some people, when I ask them what their pronouns are, they say I don't have any, or they say it doesn't matter. And I call bullshit on that, because I think that everybody is referred to by some sort of pronoun in some way. So there we go. So now we can all change it to our first name followed by our pronouns. By the way, they have tried to work with different pronouns because you know it's they, them, right, for a non-binary person. And there's several people that say, but that's plural, so it doesn't make any sense. Well, it's not actually. It was accepted as a singular form in Shakespearean English since the 1600s. We just don't use it that often. But if you go to a pizza place and you have to go to the bathroom, you're going to ask the manager where the bathroom is. And they will tell you, and you will thank them. And they will give you the key. And that's just one person, the manager. So we're using they all the time. But we've tried other things, by the way. There's pronouns like zim and zir, and z here and here. They just didn't catch on because they're not the common thing. You know how we tried African American and a lot of people didn't adopt it because black is quicker? So the same thing with these pronouns. They just didn't become as popular. They, them seems the thing that works. Some people object to they, them because they say, yeah, but that's plural. I want you to think about something. When you're talking to me, you probably will use the pronoun you. When you're speaking in second person to me, you're probably going to use the pronoun you. Guess what? You is plural. The singular is thou. So if we're going to be particular, let's go back to that. But anyway, I've described non-binary. This is kind of important. So non-binary is not just in the middle of male and female. It's just not necessarily aligning with male and female. And it could be anywhere in this thing. It just means when you say girl, that doesn't feel like me. And when you say boy, it doesn't feel like me. And if you hear that concept and you say, well, that doesn't make any sense because I have a perfect awareness of being a man, or that doesn't make any sense because I have a perfect awareness of being a woman, well, good for you. That means that you're privileged in that area and that you don't have to do the work of trying to explain to everybody where you are in this chart. Here's something really important to avoid. And now I'm getting into language and I only have about 5 more minutes. You don't want to misgender somebody and you don't want to misname somebody. Misgendering somebody means to refer to them by the wrong pronouns. Now, in my case, by now I look like a girl, but that's because I've been transitioning for 6 years. The first 2 or 3 years of my transition were very, very difficult because in order to be allowed, in order to qualify for therapy and for my transition medical requirements, I had to demonstrate lived experience as a woman, which was really vulnerable and embarrassing and so forth. And during that time, a lot of people misgendered me and I had to constantly be telling, no, actually it's she, her. So don't assume. A pretty good practice is to use they, them in general, unless you know for sure with the person. You can ask them. And if you're going to ask somebody their pronouns, you're kind of basically putting them on the spot. So a really good practice is to say, hi, my name is Cassie. My pronouns are she, her. What are yours? So Gene, in your case, you would say, hi, my name is Gene. My pronouns are he, him. What are yours? And so that kind of puts the other person less on the defensive. And don't say your preferred pronouns, because I don't have a preferred nose. I don't have a preferred left eye. I don't have preferred ears. I just have ears and a nose and a forehead. In the same way, I just have my pronouns. If you ever accidentally misgender somebody, if you thought it was a dude, and then they say actually it's she, her, all you have to do is just apologize and move on. Don't make a big scene about it. Don't stammer. Don't say, oh, I'm terribly sorry while it was confused. Don't try to justify it. Just apologize and move on. Recently, I met somebody that I hadn't seen in a year and a half because of COVID. And I called her Amy. Amy is her wife's name. Her name is Ava. So she looked at me kind of puzzled and she said, I'm Ava. My name is Ava. So I try not to make a big production out of it. I just said like, oh, I'm very sorry, Ava, of course, Ava. So in the same way, if you ever misgender somebody, just apologize and don't make a big deal, just move on. Okay, so now we're at the heart of this. So how do we make language a little bit more inclusive? A lot of you probably say, ladies and gentlemen. Instead of that, you could say, good morning, folks. You could say, thank you, friends. You could say, how are you all? You could go Southern, y'all, all y'all. If you're showing a property to say a woman and she mentions that she's in a relationship, don't automatically say your husband. You could say your spouse. You could say your significant other. You could say your partner. Leaving the door open. If she's a lesbian, she's not going to feel like you're disrespecting her or like you're ignoring her. Hey guys, I hear this all the time. Hey guys, this is not so bad, but it'd be better to say hey folks, because a lot of us are not guys. I need to speak to your mom and dad. Well, what if she has two moms? What if she has two dads? So how about I want to talk to your parents or I want to talk to your grown-ups? And are you married or single? What if the person is polyamorous? Or what if the person has decided not to marry? So a much better question would be like, what's your relationship framework? All of this takes a little thought, right? And that takes me right back to the whole point, which is to be thoughtful. Now you want to avoid some hurtful language. And the things on this slide are bad. I'm going to vocalize them because I'm trying to teach a lesson. But you should not vocalize these. These are all bad things to say. The reason why it's not okay to say that's insane, because some people do struggle with mental illness. And they're going to feel a hit if you use that word. Oh my God, I'm triggered. Is trivializing an actual mental condition. Don't be such a pussy is a misogynist thing to say. It's implying that women are cowardly. That's so gay. Unless you're talking about something that's pink and glittery, then no, it's not gay. Man up is definitely not a good thing to say because it implies that men are brave and women aren't. To say about an Asian woman that she's so exotic is tremendously racist. And then people still say that. These are words that you want to avoid. So there's a constant building of the new vocabularies, and you constantly start eliminating the old vocabularies, the ones that don't fit. And this takes work, and this takes thoughtfulness. And if you get it wrong, don't feel bad. This is not about walking on eggshells. This is not about feeling bad as a human being. This is just about improving in a little bit at a time, as much as you can. Here's some things which should be obvious, but I'm going to mention them anyway. People of color is very different from the concept colored people. Colored people is an old, archaic, white supremacist term to talk pejoratively about Black people. People of color are not Black people. People of color includes Indian and Asian and Hispanic. People of color in general is a really curious term because it's basically saying anybody who's not white, as though that was a thing. But I mean, like, there's a lot more of those in the rest of the world. So it's kind of an odd thing to say. When you're talking like this, it's kind of important to, if you ever screw it up, to apologize for real. So some bad apologies, what I call faux apologies, or no apologies, are, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Or I'm sorry I've offended you. No, I'm sorry if I've offended you. I'm sorry I offended you is okay. I'm sorry if I've offended you. It's a little bit of a cop-out. No, you did offend me. You're so sensitive. That's really bad. That's putting it on them. And I was only kidding is really just like an escaping the situation after having offended somebody. So the proper apology is like fully taking accountability. If you say something to a client, if you say something that hurts their feelings in some way, forget about being right or wrong. Just think in terms of creating a positive experience for the client. What does it take to be the problem solver that will put the person in a good state of well-being again? So here's one example. I was talking to a friend of mine who's Asian American, and they were describing a challenge that they had. And I said, well, that's a chink in your armor. What I meant by that is the chink in your armor is like when you have a weakness in your armor. When you have a weakness as a person, it's an expression. It happens to sound a lot like a slur. I didn't mean it like that. They got offended. So instead of defending myself and saying, well, I didn't mean it like that, and it's not like, I just said, I'm not going to use that word anymore. I'm sorry it made you feel bad. And they felt better. You have an opportunity when things go wrong to be the hero and to make somebody feel better. It doesn't matter if they're being sensitive or if it's your fault. Just think in terms of like, you can take control of the situation and make somebody feel better, which is a great thing. That's the end of the presentation. It doesn't, I hope that some of you can stick around for questions, because I can definitely stick around for questions, but I realized that I went over. So now let's open it for questions. And if you have to leave, then that's fine. But hopefully you can stick around.
We did have one question asking if we would share the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, I'm gonna export it out as a PDF and send it to Erica, and then Erica can send it around. Do you have any particular scenario that you've run into that you are unsure of in terms of how to handle it with LGBT people or with any marginalized demographic? And by the way, in this safe space, it's totally okay to ask a question that's clueless, to ask a question that's like, I don't know how to say this, or I don't understand this concept. Totally okay.
I can even turn off the recording to make a safer feeling space as well.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's turn off the recording at this point.